When 45-year-old Freddie Mercury stood outside his childhood home in November 1990, his hands were trembling like a child's. The man who commanded stadiums of 80,000 people was terrified of knocking on his own father's door. What happened in the next 37 minutes would heal a wound that had been bleeding for over a decade. But nobody, not even Freddie himself, knew that this conversation would change everything he thought he knew about love, forgiveness, and what it really means to be a son. The story begins 15 years earlier, when a young Bomi Bulsara made a decision that would shatter his family forever. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to know about the photograph that Freddie carried in his jacket pocket that day. A photograph that would make his father cry tears he hadn't shed in 20 years. Picture this: a traditional Parsi household in Feltham, West London. Bomi Bulsara, a stern but loving father, sits at his dining table, reading the evening newspaper. His son has just told the family he's changing his name to Freddie Mercury and pursuing a career in rock music. But that wasn't the real shock. The real shock came 3 months later, when Bomi discovered something about his son's personal life that would drive a wedge between them so deep, it seemed nothing could ever bridge it again. What Bomi found out that day? I'll tell you in exactly 4 minutes. But first you need to understand the weight that Freddie had been carrying all these years. Because when you hear what his father actually said to him during their last argument, you'll understand why Freddie spent the next decade believing he was unforgivable. The year was 1975, and Queen was just beginning to taste international success. Freddie had moved out of the family home and was living a life that would have been unrecognizable to his traditional Parsi parents. Late nights, wild parties, relationships that defied every convention his family held sacred. But Freddie thought he was hiding it well. He thought his family didn't know about the choices he was making behind closed doors. He was wrong. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Freddie had come home for dinner, something he rarely did anymore. His mother, Bulsara, had prepared all his favorite dishes, hoping to spend time with her increasingly distant son. The family was gathered around the table when Bomi set down his fork and said 5 words that would haunt Freddie for the next 15 years. Those 5 words: "I know what you are." The silence that followed was deafening. Freddie's sister Kashmira later recalled that you could hear the clock ticking from the next room. Their mother's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Everyone knew this moment would change everything, but nobody was prepared for what came next. But here's what makes this story even more heartbreaking. What Bomi said next wasn't cruel or hateful. It was worse. It was disappointed, and sometimes disappointment cuts deeper than anger ever could. "You have brought shame to our family name," Bomi said quietly, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "Your lifestyle, your choices, the way you live. This is not the son I raised. This is not the man I wanted you to become." Freddie tried to explain, tried to make his father understand that success in music required certain sacrifices, certain freedoms. But Bomi cut him off with a gesture that Freddie would remember for the rest of his life. His father simply stood up from the table and walked away without another word. That was the last real conversation they had for 10 years. Oh, there were family gatherings where they were polite to each other. Christmas dinners, where they sat at the same table but barely spoke. Birthday celebrations where they exchanged pleasantries but never talked about anything that mattered. But the deep connection between father and son, that was gone, destroyed by words that couldn't be taken back and silence that grew heavier with each passing year. But wait, it gets worse. Because in 1987, something happened that made their estrangement even more painful. Freddie's mother, Jara, became seriously ill. During her recovery, she begged both men to reconcile, to find a way back to each other before it was too late. Both father and son promised her they would try. They never did. Pride, stubbornness, and years of accumulated hurt kept them apart even when the woman they both loved was asking them to come together. Freddie threw himself into his music, creating some of Queen's most powerful songs during this period. Songs that, if you listen carefully, are filled with longing for home, for acceptance, for a love that feels lost forever. Bomi threw himself into his work and his community, but those closest to him said he was never quite the same after losing his relationship with his son. Friends from the local Parsi community remember him staring off into space during social gatherings, especially when other fathers talked about their children's accomplishments. And then came the year that changed everything. The year Freddie received news that would force him to confront not just his mortality, but every relationship that mattered to him. The year he realized that time, which had always seemed infinite, was actually running out faster than he'd ever imagined. But here's the part of the story that most people don't know. The part that makes what happened next even more incredible. 3 days before Freddie decided to visit his father, he received a phone call that would change his perspective on everything. The call came from Dr. Gordon Atkinson, Freddie's personal physician. Not about his own health, but about his father's. Bomi Bulsara, now 71 years old, had suffered a mild heart attack. He was stable, he was going to recover, but for a few terrifying hours the doctors weren't sure. And during those hours, when Bomi thought he might not survive, he kept repeating one name over and over again. Freddie. He kept asking for Freddie. When Dr. Atkinson told Freddie this, something inside him broke. Not broke in a bad way, but broke open. Like a dam that had been holding back years of love, regret, and longing finally giving way to the flood of emotion it had been containing. That's when Freddie made the decision that would lead him to his father's doorstep on that November afternoon. But he didn't go empty-handed. He brought something with him that he hoped would help bridge the gap between them. Something that represented not who he had become but who he had always been underneath the fame and the theatrical persona. The photograph I mentioned earlier. It was a picture of 5-year-old Freddie Bulsara, sitting on his father's shoulders at a family picnic in Zanzibar. Before fame, before Queen, before any of the complications that had driven them apart. In the photo, both father and son are laughing, completely comfortable with each other, completely at peace. Freddie had carried this photograph with him through every tour, every recording session, every major moment of his career. It was his reminder of who he really was when everything else was stripped away. And now, standing outside his childhood home, he hoped it would remind his father too. The door opened slowly. Bomi Bulsara stood there. Looking older than Freddie remembered, frailer somehow, but his eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, still unmistakably the eyes of the man who had raised him. "Hello, Papa," Freddie said quietly, using the name he hadn't spoken aloud in 15 years. What happened next lasted only 37 minutes, but those 37 minutes contained more emotion, more healing, more love than some relationships experience in a lifetime. And it started with 5 words that were the exact opposite of the 5 words that had driven them apart all those years ago. "I've been waiting for you." That's what Bomi said. Not "what are you doing here?" Not "it's been too long," not any of the cold or formal greetings that Freddie had been preparing himself for during the drive over. "I've been waiting for you." 4 simple words that told Freddie everything he needed to know. His father had never stopped loving him. His father had never stopped hoping for this moment. His father had been waiting. They sat in the same living room where they'd had their final argument 15 years earlier. The furniture was different, the walls had been repainted, but the essence of home was still there. And for the first time in over a decade, both men felt like they were exactly where they belonged. But the conversation that followed wasn't easy. There were tears, there were apologies, there were explanations that had been 15 years in the making. Freddie talked about the pressure of fame, about the loneliness that came with success, about the choices he'd made that he wasn't proud of but couldn't undo. Bomi talked about his own struggles, about watching his son become someone he didn't recognize, about the fear that he had lost Freddie forever to a world that seemed to value everything he had tried to teach his children to reject. And then came the moment that changed everything. The moment that healed wounds neither man thought could ever be healed. Freddie pulled out the photograph. "Papa," he said, his voice breaking, "do you remember this day?" Bomi took the photograph with hands that were trembling slightly. He stared at it for a long moment, and when he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "You were 5 years old," Bomi said softly. "You had just learned to ride a bicycle, and you were so proud. You wanted to show everyone. You made me carry you on my shoulders so you could be as tall as the trees. I've carried this picture with me everywhere," Freddie said, "through every concert, every recording session, every moment when I felt lost. Because no matter what else happened, no matter who I became or what mistakes I made, this picture reminded me that I was still your son, that somewhere inside the person I became, the little boy you loved was still there." That's when Bomi broke down completely. Not the quiet tears he'd been fighting all afternoon, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a father who had been carrying his own burden of regret for 15 years. "I never stopped loving you," he said through his tears. "Not for one day, not for one moment. I was angry, I was confused. I was scared that I had lost you forever. But I never stopped loving you. And then came the words that Freddie had been waiting 15 years to hear. Words that would heal, not just their relationship, but something deep inside Freddie's soul that had been broken since that terrible dinner in night. I'm proud of you, Bomi said. I may not understand everything about your life, I may not agree with all your choices, but I am proud of the man you've become. I'm proud of your talent, your success, your kindness. I'm proud that you're my son. The embrace that followed lasted for several minutes. Father and son, holding on to each other like they were afraid the other might disappear if they let go. 15 years of silence, 15 years of hurt, 15 years of missed conversations and missed moments, all of it healing in the space of a single perfect embrace. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened over the next few months was even more beautiful than that initial reconciliation. Freddie began visiting his parents regularly, something he hadn't done since his early 20s. Not just obligation visits or holiday appearances, but real visits where they talked about everything and nothing, where they rebuilt the relationship that had been lost. Bomi got to see a side of his son that he'd forgotten existed. Not Freddie Mercury the rock star, but Farrokh the son, the brother, the family member who cared deeply about the people he loved. They would sit in the garden talking about music, about philosophy, about the meaning of life and the importance of family. Bomi Bulsara later said that watching her husband and son rediscover each other was like watching a miracle unfold in slow motion. Two stubborn, proud men learning to love each other again, learning to forgive not just each other but themselves for the years they had lost. And Freddie began to share more of his real self with his family. Not the public persona, not the theatrical character he played on stage, but the vulnerable, thoughtful, deeply spiritual person he was underneath all the fame and success. He told them about his fears, his hopes, his dreams for the future. He talked about the music he wanted to create, the legacy he wanted to leave, the difference he hoped to make in the world. And slowly, Bomi began to understand that his son's unconventional life wasn't a rejection of everything he had taught him, but a different expression of the same values they both held dear. The commitment to excellence, the loyalty to friends, the generosity toward those in need, the desire to create something beautiful in the world, all of these were values that Bomi had instilled in his son, even if they were being expressed in ways he hadn't expected. During one of their conversations, Freddie asked his father something that had been weighing on his mind for years. "Papa, do you ever regret the way you raised me? Do you wish you had been different, less strict, more accepting?" Bomi thought for a long moment before answering. "No," he said finally. "I raised you with the values I believed in, the principles that had guided my own life. And those values are still there in you, even if you express them differently than I do. You are kind, you are generous, you work hard, you care about others. These are the things that matter. These are the things that make me proud." It was a conversation that freed both men from years of guilt and regret. Bomi stopped blaming himself for being too rigid, too traditional, too demanding. Freddie stopped feeling guilty about disappointing his father, about choosing a different path, about being someone his father didn't initially understand. They learned to love each other, not despite their differences, but because of them. Bomi's traditional values had given Freddie a moral foundation that served him well even in the chaotic world of rock music. Freddie's creative spirit and willingness to take risks had given him experiences and insights that enriched his father's understanding of the world. By Christmas of 1990, the Bulsara family was together again in a way they hadn't been for 15 years. Not just physically present at the same table, but emotionally connected, spiritually united, genuinely happy to be in each other's company. Kashmira later said that watching Freddie and their father together during that Christmas dinner was like watching two pieces of a puzzle finally click into place. They belonged together. They'd always belonged together. They just needed to remember how to fit. But there's one more part to the story. One final detail that makes it even more poignant and beautiful. In January of 1991, just 2 months after their reconciliation, Freddie gave his father a gift that would become one of Bomi's most treasured possessions. It was a recording, not a Queen song, not anything that would ever be released to the public, but a simple acoustic version of an old Parsi prayer that Bomi used to sing to Freddie when he was a child. Freddie had recorded it in his home studio, just his voice and a piano, singing in the language of his childhood, the words his father had taught him so many years ago. It was his way of saying thank you for the foundation his father had given him, for the values that had guided him even when their relationship was broken. When Bomi heard the recording, he wept again. But these were different tears from the ones he had cried during their reconciliation. These were tears of pure joy, tears of a father who realized that everything he had given his son, the language, the culture, the spiritual foundation, had been preserved and cherished even through the years of separation. The last time they saw each other was in October of 1991, just a month before Freddie's death. Bomi was visiting Freddie at his home in Kensington, and they spent the afternoon in the garden, talking quietly about life, about love, about the importance of family. Freddie was visibly ill by then, though he tried to hide it from his father, but Bomi could see the truth in his son's eyes, could feel the fragility in his embrace when they said goodbye. As Bomi was leaving, Freddie called out to him one last time. "Papa, thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for letting me come home." Bomi turned back and smiled. The same smile he had given his 5-year-old son in that treasured photograph so many years ago. "You never left home, my son. You just took a longer path to get back to us." Those were the last words they ever spoke to each other, but they were perfect words. Words that contained all the love, forgiveness, and understanding that had finally been restored between them. When Freddie died 6 weeks later, Bomi was devastated by the loss, but he was also grateful. Grateful that they had found their way back to each other. Grateful that their last words had been words of love. Grateful that his son had known, absolutely and completely, that he was loved and accepted and cherished exactly as he was. The funeral was small, private, attended only by family and closest friends. But as Bomi stood beside his son's grave, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Peace. Because he knew that their story had ended the way it was meant to end, with love, with forgiveness, with the unbreakable bond between father and son restored and strengthened. Today, more than 30 years later, Bomi Bulsara is gone. But the lesson of his reconciliation with Freddie lives on. It reminds us that it's never too late to heal a broken relationship, never too late to say I love you, never too late to come home. The photograph that brought them back together? It still exists, carefully preserved in the family archives, and sometimes when Freddie's nieces and nephews look at it, they can see what Bomi and Freddie saw in those final precious months together. Not a rock star and his disappointed father, but a little boy and his papa. Forever connected by love that was stronger than pride, stronger than misunderstanding, stronger than anything that had tried to come between them. Because that's what real love does. It waits. It forgives. It finds a way back home. But there's something else about this story that will absolutely break your heart. Something that wasn't discovered until 2016, 25 years after Freddie's death, when the family was going through Bomi's personal belongings after he passed away. Hidden in his bedroom drawer, underneath old family photographs and important documents, they found a collection of newspaper clippings. Every single article about Queen, every review of their concerts, every mention of Freddie's name in the press, Bomi had carefully cut them out and saved them, not just from after their reconciliation, but from the entire 15 years of their estrangement, even when they weren't speaking, even when he was too proud to reach out, even when the silence between them seemed insurmountable. Bomi had been following his son's career with the devotion of the most dedicated fan. He had watched from a distance as Freddie conquered the world, as Queen became legends, as his son achieved everything he had ever dreamed of. But here's the detail that made the family cry when they discovered it. On many of the articles, in Bomi's careful handwriting, were little notes in the margins. Freddie looked thin here. I hope he's eating enough. This concert was in Germany. I remember he always loved traveling. He's wearing the ring I gave him for his 21st birthday. A father's love, documented in secret, preserved in silence, never forgotten even when it couldn't be expressed. Kashmira later revealed something even more heartbreaking. During those 15 years of separation, Bomi would sometimes drive past venues where Queen was performing. He never went inside, never tried to see Freddie backstage, but he would sit in his car in the parking lot, listening to the distant sound of the crowd cheering for his son. He was so proud. Kashmira remembered. He just didn't know how to show it. He had built this wall between them, and he didn't know how to tear it down without losing his dignity. There's also the story of what happened on Freddie's birthday. Every year during their estrangement, Bulsara, caught between her husband and her son, would prepare Freddie's favorite meal on September 5th, just as she always had when he was a child. She would set the table for the family, including Freddie's place setting, even though she knew he wouldn't come. Bomi never said anything about this ritual, but he never asked her to stop either. He would sit at the table, looking at his son's empty chair, and sometimes Jer would catch him wiping away tears when he thought nobody was looking. And here's something that will make you understand just how deep their connection really was, even during the years of silence. In 1985, during Queen's legendary Live Aid performance, something extraordinary happened that nobody knew about until decades later. Bomi was watching the concert on television, like millions of people around the world, but unlike those other viewers, he was watching his estranged son command the stage at Wembley Stadium, witnessing the performance that many consider the greatest in rock history. When Freddie began singing Bohemian Rhapsody, something overcame Bomi. He found himself singing along, quietly at first, then with increasing emotion, until by the end of the song he was crying and singing at the same time, proud and heartbroken in equal measure. Jer found him like that, sobbing in front of the television, and for the first time in 10 years, Bomi admitted out loud what they both knew was true. "I miss him," he said. "I miss my son so much I can barely breathe sometimes." But even after that moment of vulnerability, pride kept them apart for 5 more years. 5 more years of missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed opportunities to say I love you, and I'm sorry, and I'm proud of you. Think about that for a moment. How many of us are carrying around broken relationships that could be healed with a single conversation? How many walls have we built that are really just made of pride and stubbornness, walls that could crumble with one honest moment of vulnerability? During their reconciliation period, from November 1990 to October 1991, something beautiful happened that shows just how much they had both grown during their years apart. They began to really listen to each other in a way they never had before, even when Freddie was a child. Bomi started asking Freddie about his music, not just as a polite conversation starter, but with genuine curiosity about the creative process, about what it meant to perform for thousands of people, about how it felt to touch so many lives through song. And Freddie, for his part, began asking his father about things he had never thought to explore before. About Bomi's childhood in India, about the traditions and beliefs that had shaped his worldview, about the sacrifices he had made to build a better life for his family in England. They discovered that they were both, in their own ways, artists. Bomi's artistry was in the careful, methodical way he had built a successful career and a stable family life. Freddie's artistry was in the explosive, theatrical way he had conquered the music world and touched millions of hearts. Different expressions of the same creative spirit, the same drive for excellence, the same desire to make something beautiful and meaningful in the world. One afternoon in early 1991, they were sitting in the garden when Freddie asked his father something that had been on his mind for months. "Papa, what do you want people to remember about you when you're gone?" Bomi thought for a long moment, watching the birds in the garden, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. "I want them to remember that I loved my family," he said finally. "That I worked hard to give you and Kashmira opportunities I never had, that I tried to be a good man even when I made mistakes." Freddie nodded, understanding something about his father that he had never grasped before. "That's exactly what I want too," he said. "I want people to remember the music. Yes, but more than that, I want them to remember that I tried to bring joy into the world, that I loved deeply, even when love was complicated, that I never stopped trying to be better than I was." It was in that moment that both men realized they weren't as different as they had thought. They had simply chosen different stages on which to express the same fundamental values: love, excellence, dedication, the desire to make a positive impact on the world. The last gift Freddie gave his father was perhaps the most meaningful of all. In September 1991, he arranged for a private recording session where he sang traditional Parsi songs, accompanied only by a piano, songs that Bomi had taught him as a child, songs that connected them to their heritage, their culture, their roots. But this wasn't just a recording for Bomi. Freddie invited his father to sing with him, creating a duet that captured the essence of their relationship. Two voices, sometimes in harmony, sometimes diverging, but always belonging together. When they listened to the playback, both men were moved to tears. Here was proof, recorded for posterity, that their bond had survived everything that had tried to break it. Here was evidence that love really can conquer pride, that forgiveness really can heal even the deepest wounds. Bomi kept that recording until the day he died, Visitors to the family home would sometimes hear it playing softly in the background during family gatherings, a reminder of the miracle of reconciliation, the power of forgiveness, the unbreakable nature of true love. And in his final letter to Freddie, written just days before his son's death but never sent because Freddie passed away before it could be delivered, Bomi wrote words that perfectly capture the essence of their journey back to each other. My dearest Freddie, you asked me once if I was proud of you. Let me tell you now with complete honesty that my pride in you goes beyond your musical achievements, beyond your fame, beyond anything the world will remember about you. I am proud of your courage in living authentically, even when it was difficult. I am proud of your capacity for love, even when love brought you pain. I am proud of your willingness to forgive an old, stubborn father who took too long to realize that accepting you completely was the only way to truly love you. You are my son, you have always been my son, and you will always be my son. That is my greatest achievement, my greatest source of pride, my greatest blessing. That letter, found among Bomi's papers after his death, is now kept with the family's most treasured possessions. A testament to a love that was tested by time, strengthened by forgiveness, and proven eternal by its ability to survive even death itself. Because that's the real lesson of Freddie and Bomi's story. It's not just about a famous rock star and his traditional father finding their way back to each other. It's about all of us, and the relationships we've let pride damage, the words we've left unsaid, the forgiveness we've withheld because we thought we had all the time in the world. We don't have all the time in the world. But we have today. We have this moment. We have the choice to reach out, to forgive, to love without conditions, to come home to the people who matter most. That's what Freddie and Bomi learned, and that's what their story teaches us. Love doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require agreement on everything. It doesn't require us to change who we are at our core. Love just requires us to show up, to be honest, to forgive the imperfections, and to choose connection over pride every single time. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, love gives us a second chance to get it right.